Hi, I'm Rob Preston. It's Tuesday. We're doing another Stroke Buddy Stroke Survivor Support Group meeting. And today, back for the second time, thank you, Shannon. We have Shannon, who is going to do a little presentation for us on knee hyperextension, how to assess it, and how to some strategies for dealing with it. So and she's going to do a little presentation, show us a little video, and of course, your questions are always welcome. So I guess at this point, I'll turn it over to Shannon. Thank you, Shannon, and welcome.
So I'll tell you a little bit about myself, just so anybody who happens to watch this video who hasn't seen me before. I am a physical therapist by background. I have been a physical therapist for over 20 years. Most of that time, I have been helping stroke survivors. I have over 400 hours of specialist training helping to help stroke survivors. I've worked in inpatient rehab and outpatient rehab, and now I own my own business. And all I do is help stroke survivors. So I was kind of back and forthing with Ralph a little bit over email and asked him what kind of questions people in his groups have about stroke recovery that I might be able to answer. And one of the topics that he mentioned was knee hyperextension. And that is something that in the group of folks who I help, it comes up pretty often. So there are a handful of things that I kind of have an assessment that I do. There's a handful of things that for treatment strategies that I typically end up implementing. And so today I'm going to talk with you about what knee hyperextension is, kind of what I do for an assessment, and we'll hit 4 big areas that kind of always seem to need to be addressed in one way or another. And then I'll come back and talk to you about some of the strategies that I teach people to work on to help eliminate that knee hyperextension. So what I'm going to do is, first thing, let's just look at when I say hyperextension, what is it that I mean? And I'm going to show a video here, and let me just go like this. So this is not a patient of mine. This is a video that I found on the internet that was from like a gait analysis YouTube channel. But this person is a stroke survivor. His more affected side is his right side, so the side that's closest to us. And what we're going to do, I'm going to back this up. So if I'm going to let it run. And so when we're talking about knee hyperextension, it's that popping back or snapping back of that knee, or that uncontrolled straightening or over straightening that somebody has when they shift onto their more affected side. So as he is putting his weight on that leg closest to us, his lower leg is moving backward in relation to his foot and also where he's going. And then his knee is straightening way more than would be typical. So if we watch it again, as his foot hits the ground and he shifts his weight onto it, that lower leg moves backward in comparison to kind of what's normal, what his other side is doing. So if we look at the leg farthest from us, so his less affected leg, as that leg comes forward, his foot hits the ground on that leg behind, he shifts onto it, and his lower leg is moving forward over his foot. And as he comes through with his other leg, and he gets to the end point right before that leaves the ground, you can see his ankle is sort of bent up as he gets ready to make his step. So, and that knee is not hyperextending. So that is kind of the typical way our leg and our joints function when we're walking forward. So what we're looking at, again, if we come to that front leg, is how do we help this knee not snap back in that uncontrolled way? And so if we, again, I'm going to kind of look at it from a frozen perspective. Go like this. Here we go. All right, so again, this is just another still picture from another study, the study that I listed down here, looking at knee hyperextension in stroke survivors. So again, just to kind of hit it home, what we're looking at is what is this lower leg doing as somebody shifts their weight onto it. And so when the knee is hyperextending, that lower leg is moving backward in relation to the foot and also in relation to which way he's walking. And so the other thing to look at here is this 157, which is indicating this degree measurement of how the ankle is. That 157 needs to be much lower. It needs to be a little bit lower than 90 and moving down as he moves over his leg. So again, we don't want that lower leg moving backward. That causes knee hyperextension. We want to do things that encourage that lower leg to move forward. That's going to encourage more knee control, more normal weight transition. It's going to decrease the energy consumption of somebody who's walking. I like to explain it to folks that if this person's trying to walk forward in that picture and the leg is moving backward, that's a little subtraction to the energy that is going to get used. It's going to increase it. So we want everything moving forward and in the direction that we intend to move. So when we're talking about knee hyperextension now for the rest of the time, this is what we're talking about. So when I work with a patient and they're having that knee hyperextension, I generally start from the ground up when I do an assessment. Because generally some of the bigger issues that need to be tackled first are lower down towards the ground. So if we talk about the parts that I'm going to look at, the first thing I'm going to check out are the toes. And so I'll want to get that person in their bare feet so I can see how their foot is behaving when they're standing on it, when they are standing on it, and when they are not standing on it. So a lot of stroke survivors experience toe flexion, bending of the toes more than you would want them to. Some people call it clawing, but it's like active bending of the toes when you don't want it. So for example, if you're standing on your foot and those toes are really, really bending. And so this is again a picture. You can see these toes on what is his left foot. It's on our right, but those guys are bent up there way more, and that's his more affected side. His left side is, but the right side of our picture compared to the other side. So I'm going to look and see if that is going on. That is a small contributor to knee hyperextension, in my opinion, because when toes are curling like that, actively curling like that, that is an uncomfortable foot for you to transition onto. And so you can try it if you have impaired sensation, say in your more affected leg. You can try on your less affected leg if that's your situation, to really claw your toes up and then transition your weight, like shift your weight onto that leg. It's not very comfortable. It can be painful, especially over many steps if your toes are doing that every time you step. And so your brain is tricky, right? I'm sure you all have experienced this. Your brain's going to figure out a way around things that are difficult, uncomfortable. And so that toe flexion, being uncomfortable, will keep you from transitioning forward over your foot, which we said was something that you need to do. And I think even if you don't have good sensation in your foot, like, well, I don't really feel it curling, even though we can see it curling if you're in your bare feet. Your brain is sensing that something's not right down there anyway, is what I have experienced with people. And so it's still a little bit of something where your brain doesn't want you to go forward over your foot. It'll help you run away from that by keeping your lower leg moving backward and hyperextending your knee. It's not the biggest piece, I don't think, that contributes to that knee hyperextension, but it's a piece that we need to address. And obviously also to protect the joints in your toes and to let you move more normally and progress the way that you walk, be able to do things a little more normally. So I check out that toe flexion, make a little mental note if that's an issue. I'm going to come back after we look at the assessment, and I'll talk to you a little bit about some of the things I might do if these things are the problems. So we look at the toes, and then we're going to move up away from the floor. And the next thing we're going to look at is the ankle. And so the ankle, again, we want to make sure that we're getting the leg moving forward over the foot, or getting this bend showing up. So if we look at, and I'm going to show you a model too of the foot a little bit later, but here's just an image. So your foot is made of a lot of different bones, and that's so that our foot can adjust to different surfaces, make different reactions for our balance. And so all those bones meeting each other, they're all joints. And so joints are supposed to move. And so one of the things, if there's an issue, again, with that knee hyperextension, I'm going to look and see if there's stiffness in the joints of the foot and the ankle. A lot of times, one of the places where there's a lot of stiffness is the joint between the top bone of the foot where it meets the bones of the leg. That bone needs to move, kind of slide backwards a little bit for your ankle to bend up easily. If it's not doing that, it's sort of acting like a doorstop, and it keeps you from moving forward. So it's important to know, okay, are all these bones moving the way that they need to? The next aspect that I would look at would be the muscles. So are there stiffness in any of the tissues, in addition to the tissues that surround all those joints, but also the muscles and the tendons? And so the muscles and tendons that, if they're stiff, will limit your leg from moving forward, are all located on the backside of your lower leg. So your calf muscles, that big tough tendon that comes all the way down to your heel, sometimes called that your heel cord. So we need to look and see how just stiff are those tissues, and do we need to have you do some things to loosen that up? You know, an additional thing is looking at, is your brain telling these muscles to be on too much? So pushing backward, making the lower leg move backward versus allowing that lower leg to come forward. And so that's sort of a brain signal type of thing that we need to look at with regards to things that control your ankle, so to speak. An additional thing that I look at are any foot braces that somebody has on. And when we go over the kind of the strategies portion of this, I'll show some of the foot braces that I see that actually make it difficult to kind of get rid of this knee hyperextension, because they restrict movement in the ankle, allowing that leg to go forward. So if there's a foot brace that somebody's using that doesn't let that ankle move, it's another thing for me to take into consideration and try to come up with a plan around how do I change that so that they can be supported in the way that they need to be, and yet allowed to move as normally as possible. All right, so we went toes, we went ankle. If we move farther up, the next big part that I'm going to look at is going to be the knee. And so in that knee hyperextension, there's a point for some people. Some people don't get all the way to this, but the way your knee works is it's most stable. In other words, not wanting to move, right? Something that's stable means it's not movable. We don't really want it to move. So your knee becomes really stable when it gets all the way straightened out, and it almost gets into a position where it locks. And so over the course of, say, the journey somebody's had with stroke, they may have been using that locking to make them feel more comfortable and steady up on their feet. One of the deals with walking, as like this little slide says, so that is a stable position of the knee. But walking is us being mobile up on our feet, right? So we want the knee to behave in a way that it's mobile, not stable. And the other issue with it coming all the way into that locking position is a lot of times folks, when it unlocks for that next step, it's almost like a jolt or really jarring. It makes people a little bit nervous, and all of that contributes to not walking in a more normal way, of being guarded, maybe of being really tight, increasing the whole tightness in your whole body. So that knee locking that can occur is a real issue that we definitely want to address. So that when I see that happening, I kind of implement some immediate strategies to try to help people sort of learn to have confidence with a mobile position in that knee versus that stable locking position. The other piece that I feel like needs to be addressed is assessing how the muscles on the back of your legs, those are your hamstring muscles, and they're the knee bender muscles. That's one way that they act. So we're saying knee hyperextension is knee too much straightening. So we need to try to look at, okay, well, how are the actual knee bender muscles working for this person? So I'll assess if they're able to turn them on at all. So sometimes that's really hard for people's brains to figure out how to make their knee bend. And if there's a little bit of movement there, but maybe not enough to be to help control that knee hyperextension, then we know we need to build on that. So that's looking at, is your brain sending a good signal to tell your hamstrings to bend that knee? So we'll look at that signal control. And then there's the actual strength of the muscle, right? Like how much oomph does it have to actually do the job that it's required to do? And we were talking a little bit off camera before the recording started about the idea of strengthening when that signal isn't quite there, or the coordination that your brain should have to turn a muscle group on. And so I'm definitely of the opinion that increasing the strength of the signal and the coordination is number one step to do, and then actually increase the strength of that muscle. So we'll look at that. So then looking at how the hamstrings are working and how their strength and coordination are to help with knee hyperextension is another little area to address. And then, so we went toes, ankle, knee. Last big thing that I look at, and this isn't all encompassing, but these are kind of the big four that I feel like always need to get addressed in some way for most people at the upfront when we're trying to start to make a change in this. So the last big area is around the hip. And so one thing that I like to look at is tightness in the front of the hip. So this little stick man, if you look at the kind of the way that the triangle pelvis aligns with the little line thigh, he's sort of flexed forward. He's bent up at his hip. And so if there's tightness in the front of our hip, we're not able to move ourselves forward, right? You're getting up, picking something up here. Like, I think it's really important to be able to get everything moving forward over your foot as some of the medicine for knee hyperextension. So if you're tight at the front of your hip and you aren't able to fully tuck your rear end under, you'll end up having some version of what this little stick man looks like. It may not be this pronounced, but even a little of it can contribute to the knee hyperextension. But if you're a little bit tight at the front of your hip, then your upper part, like your upper half, tends to be a little more forward. And just the physics of that keeps sort of this line would be kind of like the line of your weight, like a representation of that ahead of your knee. And that causes your knee to want to move backward, okay? So if you wants to move backward, there's that arrow. So if we're able to, oh, where's my little man? So if we're able to get, there he is. If we're able to get you loose at the front of your hip, where you can kind of get yourself stacked up over your knee. So we've got the little pelvis triangle stacked up, the trunk is above the knee, your head is above your knee. That's going to make it more difficult for your knee to hyperextend. And it's definitely really not going to be possible if you have it going on if you maintain that sort of forward posture or tightness in your hips. So but to get to this posture, you need to be loose on the front. And then you also need to have strength kind of on the back side. So your rear end muscles, the muscles that are responsible for tucking your rear end under you and bringing it forward versus sticking out like this guy on the left. So kind of the two big things about the hip is I'm going to look for tightness in the front and check out weakness. And again, that weakness might be weakness in coordination of signal coming from your brain, and then really looking at the strength of it. Because it could be like your brain just hasn't figured out how to turn those muscles on or to turn them on in the timing of walking, because it's such a it's a moving, kind of constantly changing thing. So there's a difference between just being able to turn them on and being able to turn them on upright against gravity while you're moving, all that good stuff. So those are kind of the four big areas that I look at in terms of assessing and seeing sort of what's going on. Now, hang on, what I'll do is stop my sharing. Okay, so in terms of that assessment, so I'll go through all of those things. And those are big things that I feel like I can help somebody take relatively immediate action on to start making a change in increasing control at their knee. There are a couple of things that are can be contributors to knee hyperextension, in my opinion, that I can't make immediate impact on. I do believe that they're going to change over the course of a period of time that I'm working with somebody, but they're not immediate. But I do want to take them into consideration. So one of those is impairments or problems in sensation, right? So if this person has trouble with light touch, that deep pressure, pain, hot, cold, awareness of where your limb is without looking at it, kind of all of those things, if that is impaired, that can be a little bit of a contributor to that knee hyperextension, especially that where is my limb in space without me looking at it? It's called proprioception. And so if somebody has impairments or problems in proprioception, they're going to have a little bit of trouble with that knee control. It's just there. In my opinion, in working on the other areas of improving control around that joint, improving coordination, ensuring that you're becoming confident in transitioning onto your more affected leg, all of those things help improve that proprioception and a lot of times other aspects of sensation. So it's not immediate, but it's an issue that I kind of file away and I keep in the back of my mind when things are going on. Another thing is that a person might have, before their stroke, tended to kind of be a little bit hyperextended. In other words, if you look at pictures of them and it happens to be one from the side, their knees might always have kind of bowed back a little bit. There are people who are like that. It's not totally abnormal. They were functioning fine in life. It didn't limit them at all. The reason it's an issue that I sort of keep on the board is that if I start to ask them to move, like to keep their lower leg moving forward, and that wasn't natural for them, then on top of all this stuff, this change that somebody's feeling from their stroke, I'm also going to ask them to move in a way they haven't naturally moved their whole life, which is just another thing that can sometimes just be a little issue. And I just file it away and I remember it. And again, it's not that if you tended toward hyperextension before your stroke that was a problem. It was fine for you. It's just now it's not super helpful in kind of moving forward and in that improvement piece. So again, two things which I think over time it just becomes a non-issue, but it's just not an immediate thing. All right, so then if I I keep those in the back of my mind, we'll come back, we readdress them, we talk about them when we're working together. But when I'm finally deciding, okay, here are some things that I want you to start to do to address the areas that we found in the assessment that need some help. So if we go back to, we started again, if we go back to ground up and we look at toes, and again, generally it's that toes are wanting to curl too much. And so what I'll say is if a person has been doing this for a while, and for a while, I might mean a couple of months, it doesn't take long for tightness to develop in tissues of the toes and the foot there. So if I'm going to have somebody work on stretching toes out towards not bending, but towards straightening, then we're stretching muscles and tendons, but we're also going to be stretching the skin, right? That skin can get really tight. And toes, like I got my little, like, toes aren't big, right? We can just overpower toes pretty easily. But the thing is, if we haven't taken time to increase the flexibility of the skin, what happens for folks is they'll get just tiny little like slit cuts where they just broke the skin, like stretched it too fast. And it's not a huge deal. I mean, it really is not, but you don't want to like break your skin if you can avoid it. So most people who, if I'm going to have them work on stretching their toes in any way, I have them start for like a week, just lotioning, just getting in there and lotioning those guys up and making sure that the skin is becoming a little more flexible. And then also being mindful, checking out after you do some stretching, making sure everything's still good and intact. So after they're good and they're lotioning and we feel pretty confident about that, I try to choose some things that are relatively easy for people to do. And one of them is to use a little tool, like, let me see, this guy. So this is a little toe spreader, and it's silicone kind of gel, really soft and squishy. So I know it's not going to be hard on any bony parts. In terms of, so we were talking about toes bending, and now I'm saying, hey, I give them this toe spreader to bring them apart. But the reason I do that is bending and closing, like closing together, those two go together. And spreading apart and lifting up and out, like in straightening, those two movements kind of go together. So if we can start with just the keeping them apart, that's going to encourage your toes not to bend. So I'll just have, so all it is, and there's like a boatload of it used to be there was only like one version of this, but yoga is super popular now. And I am not a yoga practicing person, but my understanding is being able to spread your toes and ground yourself when you're practicing yoga is really important. So there are all kinds of versions of these things out there. But if I'm going to take a little second and then I'll put this up to the camera. So my clients who only have one upper extremity that functions well can manage this with one hand. So because they're so stretchy, it's just kind of relatively easy to get them on. And then if you have that little bit of lotion on there before you do it, so it's kind of do it that way. So it's keeping them apart. And again, they also stretch a little bit the length of your toe. So it discourages that bending a little bit. So this particular tool, I don't have people get up and move in. This is just slap it on there toward the end of the night, hang out and sip your coffee and do whatever you like to do when you're just hanging out, okay? But it's a really simple way to start addressing that toe flexion.
If you search for them, they're still called yoga toes by a lot of people.
Right, yoga. So here's my opinion. So let me show you. Do I have it? So I think yoga toes are awesome. But if you're just starting this, the yoga toes that I'm familiar with, like, yoga toes, the product, like it's actually yoga toes, they really stretch, which is good, but it's not necessarily good for the first thing that you use. So just be mindful, like I said. So like, here's another little version I found on, and that's like squishy, and it came as like a 2-pack, just all sorts of little versions of it. I have one on my Thrive website, but if you just do toe spreader on Amazon, like pages and pages. And like I said, I kind of like these smaller ones if someone's just starting to do it. But like Ralph was saying, the version called Yoga Toes used to be all that was out there. It's a pretty big stretch, which in the end is actually pretty good if somebody's having that toe flexion problem. So other items, and I kind of have to look for things like on the market. So this one you can't see, it's kind of engraved. I thought it was written in white, but this thing's called the fasciitis fighter. And it's actually for helping people who have plantar fasciitis, fights the fasciitis. So it's a stretching surface that you can use in standing. And I'll show you this when I kind of put that other camera on. I'm going to step away and do some exercises. But it's called the fasciitis fighter. I thought before I did this that was written in white, but it's kind of hard foam, and it was actually designed to stretch your toes toward lifting up while you're standing, because that's really one of the big problems of plantar fasciitis. So I'll show you that one in a minute when I stand up and do some things. There's another little tool that is specifically for straightening your toes, and it's a pretty intense stretch. I noticed these things in Walmart the other day. They have a little area for foot care. I don't know if anybody's ever checked that out. These are the exciting things I do when I'm out and about. But so it is like, it's a little silicone covered strap. And so what it's designed to do is, so if I get it around a toe, I'm going to kind of slide it in there. And this one, my patients generally need some help with. And then, so it's going to pull, let's see if I can do. So it would pull your toe back, and you can, and then it attaches around. And so it gives it a stretch back in that direction. And that's what it's designed for. So there are other orthopedic problems where toe bending is an issue. And so there's two in a pack.
Isn't that muscle on the front of your shin, on the front outside of your shin, doesn't that lift your foot up?
It does lift your foot up, yes.
Because you were just talking about like just the calf muscle and the hamstring. It's like you're missing half the equation.
Right. So it's not necessarily that I don't look at that muscle, but in my experience, the bigger issue is the tightness on those calf muscles in the back and the way that is working when you come over your foot. So when I stand up, I'm going to come back to that and kind of tell you why I'm focusing more there than the muscle in the front of your foot. So if I don't hit it, wave your hand and make me come back to it, okay? So those are the things that I'll a handful of the things that I'll recommend to folks to work on that toe bending if somebody's having trouble with toe bending. And again, a lot of times I end up recommending a good deal of stretching for folks because they haven't done enough stretching of parts, and that's a lot of times the biggest issue. If we look at the ankle, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch my camera and my mic so maybe I can demonstrate some of these other exercises that try to get out of the way a little bit. All right. Okay, can you hear me, Ralph? Okay, good. So when I was talking earlier, see if I can get this up a little bit. So if we're talking about the foot and the ankle, one of the things that I said that I would check out is if somebody's wearing a foot brace. And so if somebody has on a foot brace that's solid, one solid piece of plastic, that to me, in my experience, can contribute to that knee hyperextension. Again, we said we want the leg to move forward over the foot. And if the ankle is solid in a foot brace, then a person isn't able to do that. Even if, so like here's an example of a foot brace. It's not solid. It does have a hinge in it, but the way this hinge was set up, if we look at this leg portion, and if I put pressure on it, it doesn't really let it go forward. And I'm putting good pressure on it. Like that's all the amount of going forward that this thing allowed. And so in my opinion, that was a problem for the person who was wearing this for a multitude of reasons, but he did have a little bit of knee hyperextension. So we needed to make a change in that.
And additionally, some other folks who I've worked with have had a brace similar to this. I don't know if you can see, it's just a black carbon fiber foot brace. But again, if we look at, like, the ankle would be located in here, right? But this doesn't really let the ankle move forward. If I put pressure to try to bring the top portion toward the foot, it doesn't really come forward. So foot braces that don't allow the ankle to move, I feel like can be an issue because that's what we're looking for. So let me do a little bit of something here, make sure I can see what we can see here. So if I have somebody whose ankle is stiff, you know, I do think it's important to stretch again. So if the muscles on the back side are stiff, meaning they want the foot to go in this direction, or the other way to look at it is that they don't want the lower leg to come forward. So that is why I put a big emphasis on stretching the muscles in the back. Additionally, when we're in a position, if I'm going to do this so I can keep my balance. If this is my more affected leg facing you all, as I come forward, if I shift onto it and I'm coming forward, the muscles in my calf on that leg actually work to control how much I move forward. It's not really the muscles in the front of my leg. The muscles in the front of my leg are going to be more active as my foot comes off the floor to move forward. And it's not that they're inactive, but the big boys that are kind of in charge of this movement as I go forward are actually those muscles on the back side of my lower leg. So if we look at first, if there's any stiffness, again, when I'm looking, I got to check to see if all these bones are moving, because that's going to make a big difference on whether I can move forward over my foot. And so that's something you, as a therapist, I do. That's not going to be something that you can check out, but you can talk with your therapist about it. So once we know the bones are moving, then I want to make sure that I have my person getting a good stretch of the backside tissues. So this is just a hard foam wedge. A lot of times they have them in gyms. All my patients I have them get one of these because we use it for a bunch of different things. But it's just a calf stretch where we're going to get your foot up on this surface. And depending on how tight a person is, I might say, I don't want your whole foot up on it. I only want part of your foot up on it because it may be too much in the beginning to be able to stretch this way. So being able to come forward onto this is something that I'll have people practice. They're going to stand, they're going to use something for some support. They're going to come forward until they feel a stretch, or they feel like they can't come forward anymore. Because again, some people's sensation doesn't really allow them to know what's happening. So just practicing that stretch, and if they can, bringing that other foot forward. And then I have people hold for a few minutes. And then during that period of time, I might also have them practice moving back and practicing, again, coming forward over that leg and making a small step, so that we're working on increasing the flexibility of tissues, but also training our brain that things need to be going that way and my lower leg needs to go that way. Okay? In addition to, and I oftentimes, this is one of the biggest things that needs to get addressed, because people have some available range of motion in that foot, but they don't have enough to really allow them to come forward over their leg. So this ankle stretching really tends to be key for most of the folks that I work with. So now we did toes, we did ankle. If we look at the knee, one of the things that I'll have people do who tend to snap back when they're walking is figure out how much bend they can keep in their knee and take a step without it hyperextending. And so then we do a process of going to that point and just practicing doing some repetition and training at that amount of bend. And if they're good at that amount of bend, then one might have them try to straighten a little bit more and see if they can hold there. And so that's some of that repetitive just training that we do to try to increase that control in the knee. The other thing that I'll do that's similar to that, so if a person tends to push, like they have a lot of push in their calf muscle when their foot hits the ground and that's what's throwing their knee back, again, we're going to practice, I'm going to have them practice, trying to get their brain to decrease that. So again, just practicing coming onto their foot and slowly shifting over it until they can try to increase the speed a little bit and not experience that pushing back that their calf muscles might be doing to cause that knee hyperextension. I want to make sure I don't forget any. Good. Oh, one other little, every so often, it just takes a little change in kind of how you're moving, that sometimes instead of trying to maintain like a little bit of knee bend, I'll just ask people when they come onto their leg to push their knee forward, essentially, as they're walking. And when you push your knee forward, your lower leg just moves forward, which is the opposite of that knee hyperextension. And so sometimes just a little cue like that really helps somebody just sort of figure out, oh, I need to be moving forward with that. And then if we look at hips, right? Again, if I'm a little tight at my hips, I'm going to tend to be able to hyperextend more. If I can get all the way up, I'm going to keep myself forward, and it's going to be more difficult. So I'll assess for hip tightness, give some stretches for that, depending on how well the person can move. They might be lying down, they might be standing up. But to get them stretched out there, and then I'll work on strength and control and actually coordination between the movement of the hips and the knees. Sometimes one of the pieces that causes that knee hyperextension is when the brain sends too much of a signal for knee straightening, like those muscles turning way on when we go to stand on it. So when we stand on our leg, it's really actually our rear end tucking up under us, and our knee kind of comes along and follows because they're connected. So it's really more about these muscles turning on and tucking our hip to get us up on our leg, versus I stand on it and I straighten my leg and then I come over. So I have people do just training drills, any variety of them, but one might be sitting on a taller surface, you know, kind of at the edge, feet up underneath, and practicing just coming off, tucking the rear, like really focusing on that piece so that you're having more of that happen as you come up onto your feet. And then just progressions to make it more and more challenging for that more affected leg. And again, those are just kind of some, the one thing I didn't show. This is that little tool, that fasciitis fighter. So the way that it works, that was a toe extension stretcher. No, everything's kind of dark. But you can kind of get your toes on it, and they're tipped up, and then you stretch forward. So they're lifted up that way. The other piece that I think is important when I'm working with folks, again, because a lot of I believe, the folks I see, a lot of the stiffness and tightness in the foot and the ankle are the biggest issue, is that the stretches that they do, especially for those calf muscles and tissues on the back side of the leg, they're tough. They've been taking a pounding over a person's lifetime, you know, jogging, going up steps, picking up heavy loads. So I have them always stretch and standing whenever possible, because it's your body weight's going to get a more effective stretch on those tissues than your hands pulling, your loved one's hands, you know, a strap. So I always have folks stretching kind of those down low tissue structures in standing. And those are all my little tips and tricks for today. I'm going to switch back so I can be a little closer.
Okay. So did the person who asked about the the front of the leg muscles.
Don't hear you.
Well enough?
What about the front of the leg muscles?
Say it again.
What was your point about the front of the leg muscles?
So when we're walking and our foot is in contact with the ground, and that's when that knee hyperextension occurs, the muscles that really control the leg moving forward are the muscles on the backside. The front
That
side
one,
muscles are
I
little.
just wasn't thinking about it more. That's like when you're walking, you pick your foot up, and that kind of helps pick it up and pick your toes up so you don't just
For sure,
trip over-
for sure. So
trip over
having more
yours.
activity there definitely helps with straightening the toes too. You're definitely right. So I'm here. Anybody else have any other questions?
Yes, I have a question. It's about jogging. Before the stroke, I used to jog and I used to land on my heels. After the stroke, everything is shovel. Um, should I try to get back to the heel jogging?
So before you had your stroke, when you were jogging, you'd hit with your heel. And so now repeat it again for me. How is it? What's happening?
Shovel. You shovel the feet when I jog now.
Like you're more flat-footed?
Yes, yes.
So you can, it's not like required, right? Like if you're jogging and everything's going well and your knee is not hyperextending, right? I'm hoping that that's not an issue as you're jogging in that way. Is it?
No.
Good. So, having more lift at the front of your foot is what's normal, but there are plenty of people who you see jogging who probably don't have issues like a stroke survivor would, who that's kind of the way that's their jog. So if that's working for you, you could keep doing it that way. If you wanted to try to improve that toe lift, because the only thing about shuffling, like a shuffling kind of jog or walking, is that you're just a little bit more at risk for catching your toe on something, right? Like edge of the sidewalk or, not, or on the treadmill, just not getting a little snug on it. So that's really the biggest issue with that.
Okay. I'm going to try to jog with you up from now on. Is there a shovel?
Say it one more time.
Try to shuffle with the heel up instead of the shovel.
Yeah. I think trying to do that, I mean, it's worth a try again, just because that shuffling sort of gait, whether walking or jogging, increases the likelihood you're going to catch your toe and trip yourself up.
Okay.
Shannon, you did a version of what I call roll-offs. If I was talking to Fred without you here, I would maybe suggest that. Basically, put a chair or grab bar, something you can hold on to if you need to, and you just basically practice the heel strike and the toe roll-off. Some people go and bring the other foot forward. I didn't see any harm in it, so I did that. Some people say just the heel strike and push through the toe. I did a lot of those to get that the heel strike going and the heel toe pronation, and also that one of the most important things, this is the push off with your toes.
Well, I think definitely with jogging, push off is a piece of it. So if you can
Right.
increase that, because there's a period of time where we're not on the ground, like we're airborne, right? When we're jogging. I personally, in my opinion is I don't have people practice push off for walking, just walking forward as they're beginning to walk. That's not something I do because it occurs a little, in my opinion, it occurs a little bit as a result of all of this. And that's walking forward on a flat surface. Now, when you're going up an incline, if there are other things going on, you are going to need some push off, but kind of in the beginning walking, I don't put a focus on that. And the other reason is a lot of people tend to have a lot of recruitment of those backside muscles, like way more activation of those muscles than they need. And pushing off just helps feed into that. And so I tend to err on the side of doing less of that in the beginning, but ultimately we need all of that. So I just don't like to be like, oh, no, never. There's not a never, but that for me, for the folks that I end up working with, is not a place where we put an emphasis in the beginning.
No, I didn't do it in the beginning because I basically felt like I had a therapist, but I did a lot of working out of things at home, and mostly they involved a word that you mentioned that I believe strongly in, and that's physics. So yeah, I worked on a lot of things, and by the time I was doing the push-offs, I was ready for them. In the beginning, I actually just practiced that as like a heel strike and a bit of the roll through.
Mm-hmm. And I think like you did, I think having that other leg kind of moving in that natural, it comes from behind, it goes ahead, and practicing that. And I will say one thing that I didn't cover, like talk about today, but I think another place that knee, if you tend to be a person who your knee hyperextends, another place that it'll just jump up if you have pretty good control of it is if you have to walk backward, which people are like, I don't walk backward. We walk backward all the time, even if it's just for a step or two. But because there's some piece of, if I'm going to step back with my less affected leg, my whole body ends up kind of moving back, which gives room, that physics, for your knee to hyperextend. But what we actually do is we keep ourselves over our leg we're standing on, and then we reach our other leg back and we move on to it. So sometimes there's a big piece that with folks, I'll have to isolate walking backward a little bit to practice to where it won't just snap back just because you've changed directions and you're moving backward. So
I did a lot of walking backwards. And I'll tell you, if you don't have decent balance, if you're not pretty good at walking forwards, you're going to have trouble walking backwards. So
I agree. I agree.
I could walk forwards and I could walk backwards, but my problem, I had a stroke at 17. I had pretty bad balance issues. My problem has always been turning around, like walking backward, turning around, or walking forward and turning around, and continuing walking backwards. Can't do it. I don't know if it's a mental block or what the deal is, but I just can't.
So I tell you, sometimes it seems like, even I think it's a little crazy when I do this, but like I have to, like, turning is its own thing a little bit. So I'll work with somebody specifically on practicing how to turn toward your more affected side, how to turn away from your more affected side, how to turn tightly, right? How to make like a bigger turn. And sometimes with turns, a piece of it can be, so some things like when I'm like, oh, somebody's having trouble with turns, what immediately comes to my head? So is there tightness in your hip? Because there has to be like spinning around your hip for turning to happen. That's kind of how that works. So is there tightness in your hip? Are you able to control your hip for turning your leg in different directions? Because that's a piece of what happens when we turn. So like, so if this, let's say, we'll stick with this. This is my more affected side. Right? If I'm going to turn in this direction, I need to be able to rotate around that leg to get going. And so sometimes things are stiff. You might not be able to, and that'll make it awkward. If I'm going to turn in that direction and lead with that leg, I have to have the control and the range of motion to turn it out to make that step. So sometimes that's the problem. And when we're turning, we're like, if we've been walking forward and I'm looking forward, paying attention to what's in front of me, and then I'm going to turn, I'm going to change what I'm focusing on. And for some people, like the way their brain processes all this visual changing input, and also there's information go into our brain from like a fluid filled system in our inner ear about all this turning. That's a lot of information into our brains. And so sometimes that is an issue for people. Their brain just hasn't learned how to process all that information. And so they have trouble with turning, or they turn slowly, or turning like makes them feel funky. And so that's another little piece that I address with people. But just go ahead.
I said, I don't know if you're directing your answer towards me, but I wasn't saying that I can't turn. Like if I'm just like staying there and I want to turn left and walk left, I'll do that. I was talking about walking forward at like a walking pace, like 4 miles per hour, whatever, and then turning around backwards and while maintaining that stride. That's what I was talking about. That's where the mental block is.
So I think it's all of those issues, but at a faster pace. Like it's still, for people who I work with, it's looking at like you're controlling your range of motion, and then especially at a faster pace.
Yeah, it's an
like,
information overload. I get
right.
that.
Yeah, totally. Especially because you're at that faster pace. Like, is your brain used to it? So a lot of times,
Yeah, and my inner ears effed up. So
and so just like I think Ralph has figured out and is really good at, like, breaking things down and practicing the pieces, moving at that speed, just practicing doing that piece of it, just the beginning piece of it, and not even making the total about face. Like, if you're booking it at your 3 miles an hour and you want to go back that way, that's a huge change. So you can break it down
I'm
and just
not.
turn part of it.
I feel like my words are getting mixed up. All right.
Okay, may I ask a question, please?
Sure.
Okay, I had an orthotist tell me that after a while, hyperextension can't be fixed because the tendon kind of like overstretches. She said it's like a rubber band, that if you stretch it so far for so long, it won't go back. Like, is that accurate?
And that is a piece that I had meant to mention, but yeah, so the reason that I think addressing knee hyperextension is important, in addition to helping people walk more normally and to have a normal energy consumption factor, is that hyperextension isn't a normal movement of your knee. So you can cause negative changes to all those structures and tissues behind your knee, and also to the joint itself. And so it can become overstretched. You're right.
I would add, as a stroke survivor, though, that nothing's impossible in terms of turning it around. I would say that the orthotist or the therapist that says that has seen and correctly seen that a lot of people aren't able to do that. I don't believe, this is opinion. As a stroke survivor who, like all the rest of you, face a lot of things and, to overcome, I guess I basically have to have a belief that if you work on something that you can make it better. I'm not a doctor.
I think it would take a really complete plan for somebody who was at that point. And you're going to have an orthotist who's got an open mind, because you're probably going to have to change some bracing, at least as a part of the process, and find a therapist who can kind of address all the factors that need to be addressed to be able to help make that change.
Well, according, to what you said, Shannon, if he's an orthotist, then he might have her in a stiff AFO. I've seen 3 or 4, I think either 3 or 4 in my life with a flexible ankle, and I didn't find any of them particularly flexible. I found that I had to exert more force with my arms than you could ever exert with your ankle, or it seemed to me. Again, I'm not an orthotist. So, Karen, are you in an AFO?
Yes, I am.
Do you have knee hyperextension?
Yeah, I really do. A lot.
Okay. And how long ago was your stroke? How stretch
It was
out?
5 years now.
Okay, so those tendons could be real stretched out at that point. You said 5 weeks. I'd say jump on it before it happens.
Yeah.
Shannon?
So I guess the only advice Shannon had would be, like, come up with a pretty structured plan with your therapist. Are you still in PT?
I'm not going right now, no.
Have you run out this year? Because your insurance typically
Well, no, it was basically because there are no neuro PTs near me. They're all very sports minded, as far as they just want me to, strengthen my. I wasn't finding a helpful one.
I favor neuro PTs, but I'll tell you that I went to by accident because his name was Aaron Brown, and it was a he, and I was supposed to go to a female Aaron Brown. They have MUSC, Medical University of South Carolina, has 2 Aaron Brown physical therapists in Mount Pleasant, and I ended up going to the wrong one, and he was more of he told me right up front he wasn't neuro, and I said, well, what happens if we don't make any progress? He said, I'll find you a neuro. I said, well, then let's go, because if it doesn't work, I'll get somebody else. And he actually ended up doing me as much good as any neuro PT I've had. That said, I still am a big believer in neuro because they understand and they work towards making the
Yeah.
corrections. Uh,
And
But-
I have a
So, I mean,
question.
any physical therapist, hyperextension is something that, I mean, it happens in stroke, but it happens in other things. So I wouldn't discount an orthopedic type PT from knowing something about hyperextension. Shannon, your thoughts?
I think if it were me, and I just would want to have that first, if I go to a new therapist, that first visit, I'd want to have an upfront discussion about this is the issue that I have. You know, how do you feel like you could change it? Because they should be able to lay out the process that they would, you know, they would have for you to help you change that. And so now you have a little bit of information about, okay, what are the important pieces? And excuse me. And then you can say, all right, well, does this person's plan sort of address some of these big things that we talked about today?
And if you ever go to an assessment with any PT or OT and they aren't talking to you about your goals and what you're, you know, and how they're going to get there. So in a sense, mutual goals, how you're going to meet in the middle, then you got the wrong therapist.
Okay. Okay.
That's opinion again, because good therapists will always want to know what you want to do. Do you agree with that, Shannon?
Oh yes, that should be the plan of care that they create should be based around your goals.
Right.
And we create
Okay.
our goals based on helping you meet whatever your big goal is.
Right. So you should establish that kind of rapport, that kind of back and forth. Like you should both kind of have a plan. And if you don't come out of that first meeting feeling good about the therapist's plan, then maybe you need to do something else.
Okay.
But so, I mean, if you have insurance or Medicare, or I don't know if you're in Canada or where,
No,
but
I'm in Pennsylvania.
okay. So I don't know if you're old enough to have,
Oh. I am.
okay. Well, I try not to step in it, you know.
Nice cover. Nice. Yeah.
So your Medicare resets every year. So, you know, you may as well take advantage of it. I mean, unless somebody's really bad and telling you to do wrong things, PTs generally don't do any harm, in my experience. I found some that are more clued in than others, but I don't think Shannon would want her profession, you know, said that, you know, there are people out there, you know, who don't know what they're doing or could end up doing you any harm. You can also evaluate their plan before you engage them. You
Okay. Well, that's good advice. Thank you.
You could also do it in Shannon does virtual you do virtual consultations and
I do.
stuff.
Mhm.
So you could go to a local therapist to run their plan by Shannon. You could work with Shannon remotely. There are a lot of things. I don't believe that anything's not reversible. Not, I mean, of course, you die of a heart attack, that's not reversible. But I'm talking about, and some people require tendon lengthening or shortening or, you know, various things, but you don't have anything to lose to work on trying to reel that knee back in. I don't know. I'm not the
Okay.
so maybe I shouldn't be talking.
Well, and one of the things that sometimes I'll use with folks, there's all kinds, like you said, knee hyperextension isn't just a problem for stroke survivors. Other athletes have problems with knee hyperextension. So there are knee braces out there that help restrict your range of motion. So I've had folks that we've gone that route so that we do kind of, that's a way to shorten those tissues a little bit without going through a surgical, that you're wearing a knee brace that doesn't really let you get there all the way hyperextended. I do feel like that trying to control knee hyperextension with a solid ankle type of foot brace is less desirable to me than trying to find an orthotic that helps control better at the knee, that knee hyperextension, and allow as much range of motion as you can at the foot and the ankle as part of a process. It's not the final answer, but I do feel like in making choices, those are choices that I would make.
So Karen, are you in the AFO because you have bad ankle roll or supination? Do you tend to walk outside
I
your...
I do have supination. That's only like in the past year, maybe. About a year ago, I fell and I sprained my ankle, and then my ankle got bad.
Because I was going to say, you know, one of the things to do, you know, basically Shannon saying, you know, it's more difficult with a brace or an AFO. One of the things that people who don't have bad supination sometimes do is begin walking around the house without it, building up their ankle. I was assume Shannon chime in and interrupt me if I'm getting off track, not giving correct information. But people who don't have bad ankle roll can often like walk around the house, start building up their ankle, and get rid of the AFO. In fact, we have Billy and Judy who in this group who both did that. And so I don't know if you can do that. That's something to discuss with the orthotist and your PT or maybe a doctor in terms of how bad that is and whether you could do it. I work with Judy, so I'm doing it, and I use a method that I use with local people, and it mostly involved learning where neutral is and weight bearing on that affected foot, trying to get the brain to know that the foot wants to go down, you know, flat. On the other hand, you know, there are people, and I'm sure this is running through Polly's brain right now because she knows some, and we have a friend, Angelia, that had foot surgery. There, you know, sometimes people, you know, their foot's just twisted on the end of their leg and either requires some kind of major intervention or surgery or something. So the weight bearing method works if you're, well, Judy's PT didn't want her to try it at 2 degrees. And when we got her to 1 degree, they were all on board all of a sudden. How about that? Sorry, I'm not trying to slam PTs, Shannon.
1 degree. Okay. I can't measure that accurately with a goniometer. So
Well,
that seems awfully and like an awfully slim margin.
Well, I mean, it only takes a degree or more than a couple degrees, and you're starting to walk on the outside. Somehow they measured you, right, Judy? So, well, and in their defense, they were concerned for her safety.
Sure.
I only agreed to help her because I actually gave her, she probably figured this out. I gave her a couple little tests to make sure she listened. And she listens. So I was willing to tell her this method because I, you know, if I'm trying to help somebody, I'm trying to help them, not get them into trouble. So people that listen do better than people that don't listen. But you know that.
That is true.
I was also very motivated.
Yeah, you were. Yeah, I'm not discounting that at all. Yeah, no, that was the first thing. I knew that you were motivated because I knew you. I could tell. I watched you walk from the living room around the door into the kitchen in that very first video, and I knew right away you were motivated. And I commented on it, and I kind of followed you after that. It's funny how we ended up like together, and it was really funny how when I started doing the Power of Two mentor program with the other Judy, I found out the other Judy was your mentor in that program.
Yeah.
Small world.
Well,
Yeah.
Shannon,
Yes.
uh,
I have,
Go ahead.
that does the brace I used to wear for 13 years.
Yeah. So to me, again, they've designed, that's my opinion.
It doesn't
That
give.
design is do me a favor, turn it so it's like the toes are facing you. Yeah. So the way that orthotists go, lower it down just a little bit. Yeah. So that piece that your fingers are on, it is my opinion again. So what orthotists will do is try to make that piece a little thinner to create some flexibility.
Yeah.
But I agree with you, Ralph, that it's not
Doesn't give.
adequate flexibility when it's done that way.
I honked on some with hinges, and like the hinges worked, but I had to exert such force. I was questioning whether or not that level of force was happening in a kind of flat-footed stroke survivor's, walk, to make it bend.
Right. Yeah. So I will tell you, as part of one of the tools that I use for the folks that I work with is a particular hinged foot orthotic that is hinged to help the front of the foot lift up, like a ton of that. So then when the foot is down on the ground, it helps a little bit the lower leg come forward. So and I do believe that is a helpful thing in the folks that I use, but it's not the end all be all. I get people into that foot brace again, just like you, so we can get out of it. It's a tool in the process of whatever their goal is, especially if they want to be able to walk without a foot brace and kind of get back to all of that.
Is that something that a local orthotist makes for your patients, or is it something that's okay? Never mind. So it's not a commercially available product.
It's not.
It's a methodology that you discuss with the orthotist.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, maybe you'd be willing to share that with Karen if she.
Sure. I'd be happy to. And like I said, I think just going for more movement at your ankle is definitely the key. But then there's other things to think about up the way. But anything like I like to think that anything that I add, because sometimes with people it's like we got the foot brace, we got the knee brace, and it seems like a lot, but it's part of a process. It's not like, all right, we got your foot brace and your knee brace, bye. So there has to be a plan behind it and where you're going.
Yeah.
And then, is it okay? I know there's some chat going on. Is that okay? Judy, yeah, about the bike. I agree with so Polly, Judy, your question is a wobbly knee while you're riding your bike. Are you on here? Can we hear you maybe?
Yeah, she is.
She's not there.
Oh, she's left the
not there,
chair for
yeah.
a sec. I just kept riding the bike until my knee didn't wobble. I thought about it. I focused all my brain on it, trying to keep it going up and down, up and down.
So it takes that attention and that ability to attend, because I agree with you, because it's a
Yes, it is.
coordination about your knees falling out a lot of times. Or for some people knocking in, but a lot of times it's falling out, which is like Polly, you said then around your thighs, you'll have a little band so that you can pedal and you don't have to pay as much attention. Or if you're not super successful, if you lose your attention, you don't lose it, it keeps it there, but then you could come back and put your attention into keeping it, on track. But, Ralph, riding the bike is so repetitive over a period of time. Some folks, like, it's hard to maintain attention on something over that period of time. But you're right. Trying to coordinate, holding while pedaling, there's that coordination piece and those repetitions.
I just thought I got the rest of the pedaling and balancing down, and I'm a bicyclist, so I had clip-on pedals. The first thing the therapist said was try and learn to do it without clip-on, so I put regular pedals on, and my knee fell in, and so eventually it would hit the bar. So what I did was I put what do you call them? Pool noodle. You put a pool noodle around that top bar on a men's bike anyway, so that my knee would hit it sooner to remind me, just like I tell people, if your arm, tends to come up when you walk, put a string or a ribbon around it so it tickles you. So it's just something simple, a cue. It's kind of like cueing people. It tickles you when you're walking. It reminds you to, stretch out that arm. If you do it to the outside, you can get not like a tight TheraBand, but you could actually use a loose TheraBand on the leg to keep it from going. I haven't tried that because your knee's going to go up and down too, so it'd have to be loose enough to go up and down. And
it's just a little bit of a parameter to help folks most of the time.
Right. But again, I'm not a big fan of. I always, in my recovery and the things I recommend, I always try and use things to remind the brain, if you will. You don't want to learn how to ride a bike with your knees strapped to the top bar. You want to learn how to get your brain to remember so that you concentrate enough energy on it, just going straight up and down. It took me only about, I'd say, 2 months of riding a couple days a week.
Okay.
So it's not, it's, I didn't find it all that difficult, but you know, especially if I was doing it also on a mountain bike, like on the road. If you do it in the gym, you don't have to worry about falling over. So you can take all that brain power and focus it on that knee going straight up and down. I'd ride and I'd watch my damn knee the whole time.
Well, I've mastered the new step in PT, so with my knee. So I figure I should be able to master it on the recumbent bike as well.
I love the new step. I'm a big advocate of them because they're easy to get people in a wheelchair off and on. You get some of that motion going. You know, you
Heart
also
rate.
it helps you with keeping your foot flat. It also helps with that knee going up and down straight. Yeah, so you ought to be able, if you can do it on the new step, I think you got a few weeks on the bike before you train the brain to do it. It's just my opinion or my experience and opinion. So,
Thank
what else we got in the chat over here, Judy? I place therapy on my knees when pedaling. Yeah, Polly does the same sort of thing. So Polly, you don't use that to hold it in, you use it to cue your brain, right?
A little of both,
Both.
because I have no sensation and no proprioception. So unless I'm watching my knee, I can't make sure that I'm controlling it. So it's not tight around my knees, but it is definitely there to keep my knee from flopping out, because it takes a lot of attention for me to pedal, because I have to focus on keeping my toe on the pedal, you know, my foot on the pedal, and how the muscles are moving. It takes a lot of work to pedal.
Yeah,
But I did have a question for Shannon. I am working with the PTA who does my dynasplints, and when I mentioned my toes are really, really, really bad, and I've managed to prevent any fixed contractures, but they are just getting tighter and tighter no matter how much. And I have the toe spreaders from your website. But he mentioned that maybe a metatarsal pad, and I think he was saying between the third and fourth metatarsal heads, might help. The idea, the same thing that you were talking about, the splaying, helping with the toe extension. Have you ever used that, or what are your thoughts about that?
So I haven't used that. I've worked around other folks who have tried it, and it's one of those things, because it's not permanent. Generally, they can do like a little, because you have a foot brace, right, that goes the full length of your foot.
Pretty much.
Yeah. So does it come to the end of your toes, or does it not?
Yes.
Okay. So, which I think helps a lot of times if you're having that toe curling. If it stops, like if a foot brace stops before then, that can really encourage more of that. So with the metatarsal pad, generally it's like a stick on, so you can trial it. I've seen it be successful and helpful, and I've seen it be the opposite. So you kind of have to check it out, because sometimes it creates enough, like this is an exaggeration, but it creates enough space to curl some more. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But sometimes it does what you're saying, it helps get everything spread out a little more, which helps them, encourages them to stay more straight. So I think just trying like a temporary over the course of several days to see what you think, because when you try something new and you put it in your shoe, just the change is going to make things a little funky, and it's not going to be generally, you kind of need a few days to sort of wear into it and see if it helps.
Okay.
Well,
Another
always a person that would know whether it was helping or hurting her. She's
well, yes
pretty
and no, just because of no sensation, it's hard to know what's happening in the shoe.
Stand up with in your bare foot with the foot brace on so you can see. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't walk anywhere like that, but I definitely, you can stand up, you know what I'm saying? Stand up, have your barefoot in there, not your sock, and just see, you know, you might notice, oh gosh, they curled up more, or you might notice, oh, they're a little straighter than they were before. Yeah, because you don't have the sensation to know that's happening, trying to get some eyeballs on it can be helpful to have a little bit of information about how that's working.
Sure. I did want to say that your fasciitis fighter,
Mm-hmm.
Tara Tobias, has a video where she makes a similar device just using a dry erase marker that's taped onto a surface, which might be a little better for someone who does. I mean, the fasciitis fighter is great if you aren't struggling with curled toes, but might be a little tough to get the toes flat on it when you do have curled toes.
Right. What I try to do when I post those things are things that are simple. I make all kinds of stuff for my patients, but I don't feel super comfortable asking folks to make things. It's not easy. Like some people are by themselves, they only have one side that works. So I try to find just products that are out there. But you're right. You're
Sure.
right. So it's not my favorite. It's not my favorite, but it works for some people.
But it was her DIY is pretty simple with things you might even have at home. So it might be worth looking at, especially if you might not be able to afford easily the tool.
So
Sure,
the dry erase marker has a little bit of give in it, and that's how it works.
Excuse me?
The dry erase marker is slightly soft. It's usually felt, so it has a small amount of give in it as opposed to
The outside of the dry erase marker, not the marker, like just the round marker.
the marker itself. I thought you said it was the eraser.
No, the dry erase marker. So you had the idea of the size.
Okay.
And it gives you that curve to stretch your toes.
Good idea.
Good deal.
But I will post that on the in Stroke Buddies group, just a link to that video, just as an option.
Sure. More options, the better, for sure.
Well, for anybody who's watching us on YouTube, if you want to contact Shannon and engage her, you can certainly do that. And I put all the contact information. And Polly, if you tag, I see most posts. I'll probably see it, but if you tag me in it, I'll include that. I've also got a couple that I might include. I did the standard block foot placement at parallel bars is real good for foot proprioception, unless you don't feel your foot.
Mm-hmm.
People who can't feel anything have a harder time with proprioception, I believe. Anyway, so anybody out there who wants more information or to engage Shannon can find the information in the description below this video. Anybody else got any questions? And Shannon, that's the basic stuff you sent me. If there's anything else you want me to put there, you just send it to me and I'll make sure it's there.
Okay.
We really appreciate you taking your time to do this. And anybody that knows me knows I was, trying to help Karen. I don't want Karen to leave this meeting without like some kind of like help or plan or whatever. So, I'll put whatever.
I have a question before we go.
Sure.
How long do you wear the yoga toe separators?
So I'll have people start with just a few minutes, again, because I don't know how tight you are or how big a stretch that would be for you. And then I'll have people wear them up to 10 minutes at a time, just kind of, but start a little bit. And if you're like, oh, it didn't bother me or anything, I could go longer. Then that's kind of the general rule of thumb I use for stretching kind of things.
So not during the nighttime when you're sleeping then?
No, many hours is just too much. I mean, I think doing it for shorter periods makes more sense.
Okay, another question. What do I do when I don't know if my bones are off the socket or what, but whenever I'm doing squats, I have a knock in my knee. What am I supposed to do?
So that could be coming from a few things. It could be coming from kind of what position you're getting into with your squat can cause things to sort of rub against each other and cause a knock. Sometimes if you really need to be stronger to do the squat the way that you're doing it. So kind of modifying the depth of squat that you're doing and paying attention to the position of your leg when you're doing it. If your knee is kind of falling in when you're doing it, that can create kind of some clicking and popping. So it really is about kind of what's your form like, how deep are you going, and kind of what's your base level of strength to do the squat. Those are my first thoughts. That's what I would look for if somebody I was working with was had that complaint.
One thing I wrote
Even
down.
when I'm on the bed and stretching, it's still knocking.
So that could mean we're human beings. You could have like regular old changes in your joints, arthritis. Unfortunately, just because you had a stroke doesn't mean you're free of all the other all the other problems that can assail us as human beings functioning against gravity. So it could be, a little bit of something actually going on in your knee joint. I have clicks and pops myself. So as long as they're not painful, sharp and painful, it may not be a huge deal. When it's sharp and painful, you definitely want to have it looked at. But if it's bothersome to you, you can have it looked at too. It may be strictly like an orthopedic joint issue going on causing that.
Thank you.
I liked your approach better, Shannon. I wrote down, I took the wrong approach. I tried to fix the basic problem when you talk about doing knee bends and you don't have to do them that deep. I actually did really shallow knee bends, and I practiced coming back up and not hyperextending that knee when I was not walking, just at the bar, thousands of them. And then when I got stronger, I did them on my affected leg only.
Mm-hmm.
Those are very difficult.
Yes.
And what the idea was, I didn't have a methodology like that, so my go-to was always physics. That's why I about jumped out of my chair when you use the word physics, because a lot of it, I believe, comes back to physics and mechanics.
It's true.
So I did that, and first I did knee bends all the way down. A therapist told me you don't need to go below your thighs being level. If you go down below, you're not really doing yourself much good. Anyway, I did regular knee.
Everybody's got a different opinion on that.
I do too.
Yeah. So I think go with what works for you.
I can put my fists under my butt, and if my fist is on the ground, I can touch top of my fist with my butt. But I started doing it in the rehab hospital, trying to go down as low as I could. The only thing I could do, I couldn't move my arm or whatever, but I could get on and off a toilet within 3 weeks of being in the rehab hospital. And that was the only thing they trained my wife on. They send you home with no training. They sent me home with no shower chair. Then they said, well, go pick up a shower chair. Well, how do you use a shower chair? Anyway, the one thing they did was teach you how to get up and down off the toilet. I'm doing like neutral sit-to-stands on the thing and ignoring the pole they had there. That was the only training they gave. Anyhow, I found the shallow knee bends worked really well. Shallow knee bends on your affected leg only are really, really tough. And then somebody sent me to pool therapy, and I tried them in the pool, and hallelujah. I mean, because of the pool and the lighter weight and everything, you can really I could do 50 in the pool on my affected leg only, and I had trouble doing 10 on land.
Sure.
And they were much more controlled in the pool. So I don't know how you feel about that, but my go-to is physics. If you got a problem, just and you're snapping that knee back, learn where the stop is. That's what I trained myself to do. And then I looked at
it's a very simple, good way to think about it.
Well, I just figured anytime you can't do anything, you work against that. If you can't open your arm, you work to open it. It's tightness that we're fighting a lot of times, most of the time.
Yes.
So anybody else got anything? I don't know. Judy, I think, is just exercising her affected hand there, not raising it. Luckily, I know which side people are, most of you, so I could tell you were just like doing a little therapy there. Anybody else got any questions? I want to be respectful of Shannon's time, and also I need to think about heading out myself. Okay. Well, what can I say, Shannon?
Thank you, Shannon.
Other
It
I
than-
was
appreciate you
great.
guys taking time
It
to
was-
listen to me. I really do.
No, you
It
were
was
great.
great. It was great.
Yeah, it really is great. And, I'll leave you alone for a while, but we came up with 2 or 3 things, and you said, well, maybe I could eventually do all of them. So I'm not going to hold you to it, but
For sure. No, I'll happily do it because those are things that, like, those are the big things that the patients come to me for as well. So that'll be,
I didn't think I
I'd be
invented
happy
it.
to share that.
I didn't think I invented a new list. I monitor all the groups, so I see what, I run a couple and I monitor a lot. So I see what, people are struggling with.
Sure.
And managed to snag Karen from one group or another this week. It's always good to have somebody new. Karen, feel free to come back. We do this every Tuesday. We don't always have guests, but I try and get as many guests as I can because they're more knowledgeable than me.
I
So
will do it. I enjoyed it very much. I learned a lot, Shannon. Thank you.
Oh, great. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it, guys.
we really appreciate you. Can't thank you enough.
All right. See you next time.
Okay.
All right. Have a good day, everyone.
Everybody
All right, you
have a
guys
good
too.
day.
Uh-huh.